There is just something about hybrid classes in Cataclysm that I absolutely love, and the Priest is no exception. With a fun but familiar feeling DPS spec, some additions to the Holy Toolkit to give you even more options when it comes to either single target healing or raid healing, and the Disc Priest just puts a smile on my face every time I'm healing on it. If you think you can just go in a raid and spam Power Word Shield as a Disc Priest and get massive amounts of mana back every time they pop to keep you pumping out shields, just like you do in Wrath, you're going to be a bit disappointed. Rapture is now how it was always intended to be. Only one shield's worth of mana is gained through Rapture, which does completely kill mass shielding people throughout an entire encounter, but how you play now just feels absolutely epic. So don't feel bad. You're still going to have a great time if Discipline is your jam. As I've said in all these top 10 class change videos, I'll be covering all the specs in far greater detail than this in the future, including looking at glyphs, talents, rotations, and absolutely everything else you can think of. So smash that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of those more deep dives into the classes, and let's get into my top 10 priest changes coming in Cataclysm. First up at number 1 has to be Atonement. What Atonement does is when you deal damage with Smite or Holy Fire, you instantly heal a nearby low health friendly target within 15 yards from the enemy target, equal to 100% of the damage dealt. If the priest is healed, however, through Atonement, the effect is reduced in half. Now, the big thing that you need to focus on here when you're actually healing as a Disc Priest is the fact that it is only 15 yards from whatever you're currently attacking. So Atonement is super strong for keeping up tanks and keeping up melee DPS, but the casters, the ranged, and even other healers will need more single targeted focus. Atonement feels absolutely fantastic, and in the vast majority of encounters, you really have just gone from spamming shields on everyone to now being able to just Holy Fire on cooldown and spam Smite, because as long as everyone is within 15 yards of the boss, it does do incredible HPS, and because of other talents that we are going to cover later on in this video, it's extremely mana efficient as well. The way you should be looking at Atonement though is it's more of a filler. When there's light damage going out and you don't really need to focus massive heals on people, you can stand there spamming Smite and know that you're going to keep everyone stable. But for fights like Halfers as an example in Bastion of Twilight where the boss takes increased damage, obviously the more damage you do, the more healing you do. So any fights where there's periods of time where a certain mob or a certain boss is taking increased damage, you need to take advantage of it. Healing through dungeons and heroics with Atonement feels absolutely fantastic. And once you get used to when you should be using it and when you shouldn't be using it, I think every Discipline Priest is going to absolutely love this. In our main team that we raid on Cata, our Disc Priest is normally doing nearly the same amount of damage as the tank. So having that healer that's actually keeping everyone stable and still putting out a reasonable amount of DPS as well is just absolutely amazing. What you're probably thinking though is, well, it's great that you can spam Smite and you can spam Holy Fire on cooldown, but what good's that if I'm not hit capped and I'm constantly missing? Well, you'll be using Glyph of Divine Accuracy as one of your major glyphs, which increases your chance to hit with your Smite and Holy Fire spells by 18%. So you're hit capped from using a major glyph, which again is absolutely amazing. And then coming in at number 2 is Chakra. It's actually a bit of a two-part, well, three-part to be fair, because it's both Chakra, Revelations, and Holy Word Chastise. There's 3 different states that you can be in. One would be for single target healing, one would be for AoE healing, and one would be for doing damage. Now, Revelations improves this. When you go Holy, you get Holy Word Chastise, which is an ability on a 21-second cooldown. Ordinarily, all it does is chastises the target, doing some damage and disorientating them for 3 seconds. With the Revelations ability, depending on what Chakra state you're in, will morph that chastise ability to do something else. If you're in Serenity, it will heal the target for a decent amount, but also increase the critical effect chance of your healing spells on that target by 25%. Of course, this would be what you'd use for single target healing. If you go into the AoE Chakra state, this is then going to put a healing effect on the ground for 18 seconds on a 40-second cooldown. When everyone stands in it, they take extra healing. So it's not massive healing, but with everyone stood in it, it's extremely efficient. Once single target healing is about to start, you can simply pop your Chakra ability and use a single target heal. This will then change the state of that chastise to now be Holy Word Serenity. This is on a 7-second cooldown, which now is an instant cast, decent sized heal, which then increases the critical effect chance of heals on that target by 25%. It's also an incredibly efficient single target heal. It's then as simple as popping your Chakra again and using an AoE heal to change that chastise back to your Sanctuary, which would be your AoE floor heal. If for some reason you need to start doing damage though, you can just wait for the Chakra cooldown to finish, pop it again, and then do a smite. And now when you do a smite, it's going to put you into the Chastise Chakra, which will increase your Shadow and Holy damage. So your Chastise ability will be back to normal, but it will do increased damage. Unfortunately, there's no Atonement healing for Holy Priest though, so the benefit of actually doing damage outside of helping to kill the boss quicker is kind of irrelevant. You're not going to get any heals from it. Overall though, it really makes the Holy Priest a really interesting spec to play, because you need to understand when and where you should be in what chakra state. Moving on to number 3, which also we're going to touch on in number 4, is Archangel. Now, Archangel has a different effect depending on what you're using it as, whether you're using it as Disc or you're using it as Shadow. When you use it, Archangel instantly restores 1% of your total mana and increases your healing done by 3% for each stack of Evangelism. We'll get onto Evangelism in just a second. Archangel instantly restores 5% of your total mana and increases the damage done by your Mind Flay, Mind Spike, Mind Blast, and Shadow Word Death by 4% for each stack of Evangelism. Both of these effects last 18 seconds, but if you're a healer, it only has a 30-second cooldown, whereas if you're DPS in a Shadow, it's got a 90-second cooldown. Now, the Evangelism stacks that you're going to be stacking up can stack 5 times. I feel like I said the word stack quite a lot there. When you cast Smite, Holy Fire, or Mind Flay, this is how you gain the Evangelism stacks. So if you're using Smite or Holy Fire, this increases the damage done by your Smite and Holy Fire and Penance spells by 4% per stack, and reduces the mana cost of those spells by 6%. This is the talent I was referring to when we were talking about Atonement at the start of the video, where spamming Smite and Holy Fire is incredibly mana efficient. Not only is Evangelism increasing the damage, but it's also reducing the amount it costs by 30%. The Evangelism stacks you're going to gain if you're using Mind Flay increases the damage done by your periodic Shadow spells by 2%, and this is per stack, so this will stack up to 10% damage for all your periodic abilities. And this is why Archangel is a really interesting ability. You've got a choice to make between having 10% periodic Shadow damage, or if you're Smite and Holy Fire spamming as a Disc Priest, you've got that increased damage and the reduced mana cost of the spells. So to get the 5% mana back with the 5 stacks for Discipline or Holy, you need to know that it's a time where you can really make use of that extra 15% healing. And this is why Atonement spamming's great, but if the raid starts taking big damage and you can quickly pop an Archangel and start using Prayer of Healing on a party, it makes a really interesting playstyle, because you're going to want to use Archangel to get the mana back, but you're also going to want to then make use of the bonus healing that you've got, so you can start throwing around Prayer of Mendings, even using heal or greater heals, just basically taking advantage of the Archangel effect. And then you can start stacking up Evangelism again, ready to go again. This actually leads nicely onto number 4, which is Shadow actually now having a DPS cooldown outside of just using your Shadow Fiend. The DPS cooldown we're talking about is, of course, Archangel, because when you use it, it instantly restores your mana, but then also increases the damage of Mind Flay, Mind Spike, Mind Blast, and Shadow Word Death by 20%. Now, a 20% damage buff is absolutely huge, but it's using it in the right way. So, of course, you're going to want to make sure that your Evangelism stacked 5 times and you've got your dots reapplied so they're benefiting from the 10% extra periodic Shadow damage. And then and only then will you want to pop Archangel and know that you can absolutely pump all of your abilities that are buffed from Dark Angel. So you're going to want to be using as many Mind Blasts in this period of time as possible, as well as obviously Mind Flay and Shadow Word Deaths. So this can be extremely powerful towards the end of a fight, because you can Shadow Word Death all the way through a fight, no problem. But below 25%, they take triple damage. So taking triple damage from Shadow Word Death whilst also having Archangel up that's going to increase its damage by 20% is absolutely huge. And of course, it's only on a 90-second cooldown, so having a 20% damage buff every 1.5 minutes, you do want to be using it as much as possible. And don't sleep on the fact that you're going to get mana back, because if you're having to multi-dot, mana as Shadow is incredibly intense. Now, I know we covered Archangel in the last point, but I wanted to cover it in more detail for Shadow, purely because it's amazing that as a Shadow Priest that feels so familiar in Cata anyway, because quite honestly the rotation doesn't change that much, to now have a cooldown is just phenomenal. And then moving on to number 5 would be Power Word Barrier. Discipline now has an absolutely amazing raid cooldown. What it does is summons a holy barrier on the target location that reduces all damage done to friendly targets by 25%. Also though, while within the barrier, spellcasting will not be interrupted by damage, and the barrier lasts for 10 seconds. 10 seconds of 25% damage reduction whilst everyone stood in it, and your spells can't be interrupted. I mean, it's such a great cooldown. And you can make it even better. If you glyph Power Word Barrier, it also increases the healing received while under the Power Word Barrier by 10%. It is literally such a bonkers raid cooldown. Not only that, but it looks absolutely fantastic as well. There's so many fights I could sit and list where there's periods of time of high damage where it requires high healing and you're all stacked, that this is used almost on every boss fight. And because it's not targeted on you and you can place it wherever you want, even if you wanted to use it as an extra cooldown for the tank, if the tank's about to take ridiculous amounts of damage, you'll be able to increase the amount of healing he receives by 10% and reduce the damage he's taking by 25%. It's just got so many use cases that, well, it had to be mentioned in this video, because as far as discipline goes, I'm a big disc fanboy, and cata is absolutely amazing. But this cooldown is just the icing on the cake. It's been briefly mentioned already in point 4 when we was talking about Shadow having a DPS cooldown, but Shadow Word Death comes in at number 6. And that's not only because it's a super strong execute ability now, because its damage triples if you're using it at 25% health, but you can also use it outside of its execute range to be able to get mana back. If you play a Shadow Priest in Wrath of the Lich King at the moment, you know sometimes if there's multi-dotting going on, mana can be a bit of a nightmare even if you're using Dispersion and Mana Fiend. Well, thanks to this talent here, when you take a damaging attack equal to or greater than 10% of your total health, or damage yourself with Shadow Word Death, you instantly gain 10% of your total mana. So anytime you weave in Shadow Word Death, you'll just watch your mana absolutely fly up. That's not all I want to talk about with Shadow Word Death. Not only is it now a super powerful execute ability to use at less than 25% health, if your Shadow Word Death fails to kill the target at or below 25% health, its cooldown is reset. It can't occur more than every 6 seconds, but essentially what it means is every time you start using it when the boss is on less than 25% health, you can use it twice. So you're using a super powerful execute ability twice every time it's off cooldown. All round, Shadow Word Death doesn't feel massively different, but the minor changes and minor talent additions that have affected the spell have just made it absolutely amazing. And then coming in at number 7, which can be used as the ultimate troll ability, but also actually very useful, is Leap of Faith. Leap of Faith is like Death Grip, but for friendly targets. So you pull the spirit of a friendly party or raid target to you, instantly moving them directly in front of you. It's on a 1.5 minute cooldown. When I say this can be used as a troll ability is because you can sort of go close to the edge of bridges and stuff like that, and then grip someone towards you and hope they walk off the side, and it can be quite annoying, but it is really fun at the same time. But it has its uses. If you was to say, for example, someone's fell into the lava or fell off of something high, you literally can just grip them back up onto safe ground. And that's kind of what it's used for more often than not, and where it's really, really strong. And the thing is with this ability, it's for all priests. So Shadow, Disc, Holy, it doesn't matter what spec you are, you're gonna get Leap of Faith. It can even also give a sprint with Body and Soul if you was to go Holy, where not only Power Word Shield gives people movement speed, so does Leap of Faith. Overall, it's a great addition to the toolkit, and one that will have some really interesting uses in raids. Coming in at number 8 is dot clipping. This will likely be mentioned in multiple class videos just because it's such a substantial change that it's worth mentioning on a spec where it's actually relevant. And Shadow's one of those, as is Affliction, as is Resto Druids, Feral Druids. Basically, anyone who's got hots, dots, you need to know how they work now. When Cataclysm first came out, Blizzard changed how hots and dots actually work. In Wrath of the Lich King, with high levels of haste, or as your haste increases, it reduces the overall time of the dot that's on the target, which is both good and bad. Because yes, it's going to tick more often, but also the duration's reduced, so you need to cast it more frequently. Well, that changes in Cataclysm. The duration of the dot will always be the same. So if it's a 15-second dot, it will always last 15 seconds, whether you've got 1 or 1,000 haste. Instead, what changes is there's breakpoints. These breakpoints basically reduce the amount of time between the ticks. So essentially, in that 15-second time, you can get extra ticks at certain breakpoints of haste. And then the changes to actually clip in your dots. So what clipping your dots means, in Wrath of the Lich King at the moment, if you've got Vampiric Touch on the target, if you don't let that last tick happen before you refresh Vampiric Touch, it's going to be a DPS loss. Also known as clipping the dot, because you're clipping a portion of it or some ticks of it, which could have actually happened before you needed to reapply it. Using Vampiric Touch on a target will last 15 seconds, like you can see. If you just let it run its course, it will always just last 15 seconds. And in Wrath of the Lich King, if I was to cast it now, it would instantly start at its duration again, and you would be waiting that first 2 seconds for its tick. Well, how it actually works now is the time carries on. So if I refresh as a tick happens, it went to 16 seconds. seconds, because it will always, no matter how many times you apply it, it will always be 2.47 seconds between ticks. So you could spam it and it doesn't matter, it will always tick every 2.47 seconds no matter what you do. This is why what you want to do now is make sure that you're refreshing it between the final 2 ticks, because what this will then do is mean there's 0 downtime on the dot at all, and that final tick will be added to the final duration. So if I start casting now to put it up between the final 2 ticks, you see it went up to nearly 17 seconds. The final tick will still happen. So for any dot or any hot, you're always wanting to cast it between the last 2 dots ticking, and you're never going to lose that dot, and the dot will continue to tick at the desired rate, which in this case is 2.4 seconds. But like I say, it doesn't matter whether you refresh it as a dot ticks or halfway through a dot ticking. For as long as that dot exists on the target, it will always tick between the same rates. So bottom line is, as any dot class, you always want to be refreshing the dot before the last tick, so preferably between the penultimate and the last tick. This means that tick will always happen because it will basically be just extending the dot's time. So it's no longer a time like Wrath of the Lich King where actually you want to let the dot fully fall off before you apply it again. Now it's more about timing it and making sure that you know how often it ticks. For example, if you've got an ability that ticks every 3 seconds, you'll want to refresh it in the last 3 seconds. If it ticks every 2 seconds, you want to refresh it in the last 2 seconds. Whilst I know that's a systematic change rather than a Shadow Priest specific change, I thought it was worth mentioning because it really does change the way a Shadow Priest plays. Now, coming in at number 9, and it is something that I mentioned in the intro, and that's Power Word Shield. If you play a Discipline Priest in Wrath of the Lich King at the moment, you know this is literally your most casted spell. You want shields up on as many people as possible for as long as possible, and then preferably you want them to all break around the same time, so Rapture procs and gives you an obscene amount of mana back. Well, that doesn't actually work anymore. Rapture now will only give you 7% of your total mana every 12 seconds. It doesn't matter whether you've got 1 shield up or 10 shields up. Now, it is 7% of your total mana, so of course you're wanting to make sure that you're using Rapture on cooldown and having a shield break every 12 seconds. But shields are expensive, you're not going to want many out at a time. A single shield costs 7,000 mana. So if you was to start spamming these shields, you'd see how very quickly your mana would just disappear. Again, I feel the Rapture change is big enough to make an appearance in this top 10 list because it really does completely change the way a Discipline Priest heals, going from Wrath of the Lich King to Cataclysm. An interesting thing with the Weakened Soul effect, though, at the moment, if you Power Word Shield someone, your Weakened Soul effect will last as long as your shield. But you can reduce the Weakened Soul effect with Strength of Soul. So when you heal a target with Heal, Greater Heal, or Flash Heal, the duration of the Weakened Soul debuff on the target is reduced by 4 seconds. In addition, when you cast Inner Focus, you become immune to Silence, Interrupt, and Dispel effects, which, that's just a bonus. Now you're thinking, well, why was it important to mention that? Well, the reason it's important is because you can benefit from Rapture every 12 seconds. Yet if you put a fresh shield on someone, you've got 15 seconds of Weakened Soul. So if you're just aiming to get Rapture procs to happen from healing the tank, if you simply just weave in 1 heal now and again, it'll reduce the Weakened Soul enough to be able to get Rapture to proc every 12 seconds. Because with how hard tanks get hit and stuff like that in Cata, the chances of you going from 1 shield to the next on the same target, so on a tank without the shield breaking, is highly unlikely. Your shield's probably going to break in the first, I don't know, let's say 5-10 seconds, so you're going to want to be able to see that shield come down, get rid of the Weakened Soul effect, and get a new shield up, knowing that it will break within that next 12-second window. It's just something that you're going to sort of learn to juggle. You could absolutely do it on 2 targets if there's 2 tanks, obviously, and ensure you're proccing your Rapture every 12 seconds. But again, Rapture and the way shields work is just a significant enough change to warrant making this top 10. And then coming in at number 10, spoiler, we're going to have a bonus, and number 11. At number 10 is Inner Will. Now, Inner Will is learnt by all specs of Priest, and it's a burst of holy energy fills the caster, reducing the mana cost of instant cast spells by 15%, and increasing your movement speed by 10%. Now, Inner Will and Inner Fire, you can only have one on at a time, obviously. But if there's a period of time when you need to move, having that extra 10% movement speed by quickly popping into Inner Will, and then as soon as you need to stop still, you can put Inner Fire back on, can be extremely useful. Of course, you're not going to want to sit in Inner Will all the time because you'll be losing all that spell power from Inner Fire. But if you need to move for any period of time and you want that extra movement speed, switching between these two whilst it costs a GCD, they cost 0 mana. So not only is it a new ability, but it's one that you can actually use quite often if you do need to move around, or as a disc priest and you know you're going to want to put out a few shields and maybe even a prayer of mending or a renew. You might want to switch to inner will and then stop still and get these abilities out and then change back to inner fire. I've not really got much more to say about that. It's just a cool new ability that you can use situationally. And I said there's going to be a bonus one, and there's going to be a bonus one purely because it's a new ability that I haven't mentioned, and that's Mind Spike. Obviously, depending on your spell damage will depend how much damage this does, but Mind Spike blasts the target for X amount of Shadow Frost damage, but it extinguishes your shadow damage over time effects from the target in the process. Mind Spike also increases the critical strike chance of your next Mind Blast on the target by 30%. And this stacks 3 times. But not only that, with the Mind Melt talent, which increases the damage done with your Shadow Word Death by 30% on targets at or below 25% health, and when you deal damage with Mind Spike, the cast time of your next Mind Blast is reduced by 50%. That stacks twice, meaning it's instant cast. It's actually incredibly useful as an ability that if there's a mob that spawns that's not going to last long enough, for example, for your dots to actually do their full duration, you can Mind Spike, Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death, and dispatch of these low health adds very quickly. Up until this point, it's something that priests would have had to have relied on Shadow Word Death, Devouring Plague, and Mind Blast to do, but now you've actually got a way to really get rid of things fast using Mind Spike. Again, it's one of those where there's not that much to say. Once you understand how it works and the situations you'd use it in, it's a really good addition to a Shadow Priest toolkit. And that's it. They're my top 10, well, 11 changes to the Priest coming in Cataclysm Classic. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, because as I say, we're going to do all of these classes. If you haven't seen the playlist, which I'll put somewhere around here now, you can go and check the other classes that I've done, which at this moment in time is Paladin, Druid, Rogue, and something else, Hunter. So again, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. See you on the next one.